here very soon at the U.S. Capitol. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle will gather as a sign of political unity, out of respect for a life extraordinarily well lived. Politics set aside today, what people are honoring is a good man, a man who lived his faith. Every day was Sunday for him, in the sense that he was always striving to do what he thought God would want him to do. Obviously, there are differences of opinion when it comes to policy in this town, but there's not much difference of opinion that Jimmy Carter was a man of faith, and that he lived that faith for all those 100 years. At 7 o'clock tonight, people will have a chance to line up and begin to pay their respects, and I think it'll be interesting. I have no doubt. I heard, Christine, you mentioned 23,000 people made the procession and got a chance to learn a little bit more about Jimmy Carter's life by going through the Carter Center. It really is worth going if you haven't been. It'll give you even more appreciation for his life. And they'll have a chance to line up here at the U.S. Capitol beginning tonight at 7 for 5 hours, and then all day tomorrow before his body is taken to the National Cathedral on Thursday morning for the memorial service. Let's go back to our Tyler Fingert, who was at the Navy Memorial. That was quite a ceremony there, and Tyler, practically the entire Carter family was involved.
Yeah, Russ, good afternoon to you. You could hear a pin drop here as you heard every command from these officers, service members, as they did that dignified transfer from the hearse to the caisson that is now making its way to the U.S. Capitol. And you mentioned the Carter family. I mean, for me, the thing that sticks out in all of this is they're having to mourn in public. They are having to see everyone else as they are dealing with this loss. And I saw Jason Carter, along with many members of the Carter family, having their hand on their heart as they were in the process of doing that dignified transfer to the horse-drawn wagon that is now making its way to the Capitol. And so they're grieving in public. This is obviously a personal loss for them. Former President Jimmy Carter, 100 years old, a grandfather, a father, and for many of them, a great-grandfather as well. And so for many of them, this is a personal loss. But for this nation, he is a huge part of this country. He was our nation's 39th president, served 4 years in the White House, commander-in-chief, also served our country in the Navy for 15 years, both in active and in reserve. And it just obviously you can't take that for granted, because he is, as much as he is just a family man of God, he unfortunately also, or fortunately, he was shared with this country as president. And so this loss, obviously, for many people is a personal one, not just for the Carter family, but for Americans, as he is now making his way to the U.S. Capitol, where he will lie in state, as you were mentioning, Russ. So this is a day where he is returning to Washington for the final time after passing away just within the last week and a half. And so this is something that he is getting all of his honors that he is due, being our former president and also being a veteran of the Navy. And so to just see how many people showed up for him. I mean, just beyond the Navy Memorial, there were actually, I think that's apartments or condos up there. We actually could see people out on their balconies, and then you also saw hundreds of people lining the streets coming out here. I mean, it is freezing for people who live here, 32 degrees right now, and people sat out here for probably about an hour or two just for that glimpse and being able to pay their respects to former President Jimmy Carter. And I'm sure many more are going to be going to the Capitol starting tonight at 7 o'clock to be able to go pay their respects to him in person under the Capitol Rotunda. And so it is truthfully, it was, to see that in person, I have never experienced anything like that. Just the pin drop, you could hear everyone just intently listening to this as he was had a dignified transfer from that hearse to that horse-drawn wagon that is now making its way to the Capitol. You're looking at those pictures right now as those service members are just preparing for his arrival. That short little about mile-long route, as Tom was mentioning just about 15 minutes ago. Truly probably feels like an eternity in this freezing cold temperatures, and you can obviously just know that for many of these people, for many of these service members, this is an important chance to honor a former commander-in-chief for all he did for our country, this grateful nation, Russ.
Tyler, well said. It's the ultimate sign of respect as we look now at the east side of the U.S. Capitol. This is the side from which the public will enter into the Capitol Rotunda to pay their respects to the former president, again beginning at 7 o'clock tonight. But before that happens, he will lie in state in the presence of lawmakers, House and Senate lawmakers from both sides of the aisle, members of the Carter administration, and of course the Carter's extended family. Jason Carter, now the chairman of the board of the Carter Center, as they continue their work. He says that his grandfather's life fills the spirit of that place, and his hope and expectation is that the work will continue to finally eradicate guinea worm, to eradicate river blindness in Central and South America, to look after the least of these. This sign of respect, the precision that goes into this military honor is really quite something. Let's listen. D.C. And the temperature goes down as well, that there will be some sacrifice involved for the people who come to pay their respects to the 39th president. And I think that some of those folks might enjoy the fact that there's some sacrifice, knowing that sacrifice was a real part of Jimmy Carter's life, that humility was a big part of his life. So to come here tonight on a night when it gets cold, and it is windy, so the wind chill is probably 10 or 15 degrees colder than the temperature outside, to come out and show that kind of respect has a little more to it. Let's put it that way. There's some more commitment that goes into paying that kind of tribute to the president on a day like this. Tom and Christine, we have witnessed all day an extraordinary demonstration of how the U.S. military has respect and the tradition that they follow, the way they're able to lift up a former president this way and in the way that he ought to be celebrated.
Yeah, the pomp and pageantry, Russ, is so striking and remarkable to watch all of this unfold in the kind of precision that it does through the streets of the nation's capital, which are now no longer enjoying the light of the sunshine. Dusk is upon you up there, and you can see the streets underneath the horse-drawn carriage kind of freezing over as temperatures are expected to dip below freezing tonight as the late president makes his way up to the Capitol steps.
There was a shot from inside the Capitol Rotunda. We talk about the stillness that was felt outside the Naval Academy as the procession was in place. And you see inside the Rotunda the level of stillness before the remains of the 36th president arrive inside. Russ, I know you had a chance to talk to Senator Raphael Warnock. I don't know if he shared with you what he anticipates being able to be a part of this moment inside the Rotunda to witness the funeral service that will take place here.
Well, he said he wouldn't miss it for the world. Both he and Senator Ossoff plan to attend, as well as many Republicans will be in attendance as well, because they feel it's the only place to be this afternoon to show unity of purpose in showing respect to the former president. Senator Warnock made mention of how important he was in putting human rights and civil rights first and foremost in his administration. When it came to foreign policy, human rights were a leading light in his taking on of the Soviet Union. For example, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, he made a lot of people angry by boycotting the Olympics, but he felt like it was the thing to do because human rights to him were that important. There's so much to celebrate about former President Jimmy Carter's administration, perhaps first and foremost the 13 days that he spent at Camp David with Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begum that resulted in the Camp David Accords. That is a peace treaty that still is in effect today. There is peace between Israel and Egypt today, and try to imagine what the Middle East would be like without that. And that was certainly one of his proudest accomplishments when he was in office. But there are so many that you discussed with Mr. Harris. Deregulation of the airline industry, deregulation of transportation, generally speaking. Even the craft beer industry. People don't realize he was sort of set the legal framework for that to happen. There are so many things to celebrate, but primarily I think today they're celebrating a man of faith. And this is what Senator Warnock said, that he thinks of him as a man of faith who lived out his faith on a daily basis. I had a conversation with Andrew Young, the former Atlanta mayor, and before that, UN ambassador to the United Nations, the first African American to serve in that role. And he put it to me this way. He said he felt like Jimmy Carter's life was a ministry, that he did what he thought was right and let the politics take care of itself. And the politics really didn't take care of itself when it came to 1980, and he was certainly disappointed in that result. Some in the family, Jason has said that even the former president himself acknowledged that perhaps Rosalind was the more political animal of the two, and that she suggested to him, for example, and this is an issue we hear about in the news today, she suggested to him that perhaps they not do the Panama Canal Treaty until his second term because it was politically unpopular. But he felt that it was the right thing to do, and that's why they did it. So all of this pomp and circumstance, all of this respect and reverence is for a man who almost everyone acknowledges did at least what he thought was the correct thing to do in the moment. And to do that for 100 years is quite something.
Yeah, there was a story, I believe it was in the Wall Street Journal, Russ, as we await the remains of President Carter to move into the Capitol Rotunda up the steps there, of when he first met Andrew Young and when he was a state official here, the late president. It was at a lunch, I believe, and Young wasn't that enthused to meet and greet Carter until he learned of Carter's civil rights bona fides from some of his relationships in Plains. And only at that time did Young agree to meet Carter and sort of learn more about him and his stand on civil rights, which at the time went against many here in our own state of Georgia.
And it's quite remarkable to learn that Jimmy Carter never even met Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
There was a relationship, and Russ, you spoke to that earlier, that the elder King knew Jimmy Carter, but he never met MLK Jr.